we love by embracing a pathway to 100% renewable energy in our children's lifetime. But we
30 seconds.
But we can't leap into this future if some people are left behind due to racism. And so that's why we have to work so hard to demand that a culture shift in our police forces that is real, profound, and permanent. We have to create economic opportunities for everyone, especially black youth. And we must make sure our education system treats everyone with fairness, dignity, and respect. And so together, we can change the status quo in Ontario. Together, we can bring people-powered change to this province to create an inclusive society that benefits everyone. And I look forward to working with you to deliver that change to Queen's Park. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the first question is directed to Kathleen Wynne. I'll be followed by Andrea Horwath and then Mike. You will have 2 minutes each to respond. I notice that each one of you acknowledged the presence of anti-black racism. And in 2013, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed 2015 to 2024 as the International Decade for People of African Descent. With that in mind, what do you see as some of the most pressing struggles and latent opportunities in the province's African Canadian communities? And if elected, what would you do to address these concerns?
Thank you, Royson. And, you know, I've been working with my colleagues, Michael and Mitzi and McKinney and Granville and Lisa, and much of the work that we have begun is an acknowledgement of the realities that are underpinned by the United Nations Decade for the People of African Descent. We acknowledge that in our government, and the work that the Anti-Racism Directorate is set up to do, and you know, it works across government. So there's $47 million, for example, going into 74 community organizations to do the work in community to facilitate better outcomes for young people, for families, and so continuing to tackle
exposure to systemic racism as a young girl. I mean, everyone in this room is experiencing that today. I mean, when I go onto university campuses and hear young women talk about the daily microaggressions that they have to deal with and then try to hold their chin up and continue in on their studies, it should not be happening. When I have meetings, roundtable discussions with community-based leaders in this community who are frustrated because yet again, some politicians asking them to tell their story when the story's been told many times for decades, it's getting a bit old. And so what we need to do is not only the work that the Premier is talking about, but we need to engage the grassroots community groups that are doing so much on the ground work and make sure that we're giving them the resources they need to make daily change in their communities. We need to deal with the trauma that's happening in neighborhood after neighborhood and make sure we're providing resources to help families, to help youth, to help colleagues at school deal with the trauma that occurs too often in our neighborhoods in this city. But we also have to look at the makeup of government, the makeup of every government department, the makeup of every board and commission. Why is it that those places still do not reflect the community when it comes to who is sitting on those boards and commissions? And those boards and commissions are always appointed by the sitting government. So yes, there are things that we need to do to deal with the things I talked about already, and we are determined to do those things. And so whether it's the work that the New Democrats did to name carding for what it was and then take it on in the legislature with Jagmeet Singh, or whether it's the work that we continue to do with you, we'll be there shoulder to shoulder fighting with you on these struggles.
Thank you, Andrea. Mike?
So I think one of the biggest things we have to do is remove the barriers to success. Remove the barriers that are preventing people from achieving what they want to achieve, their dreams. First of all, we have to eliminate carding. Like what I have heard from members of the community, what people are telling Justice Tulik as he does his report on carding, is that the current restrictions are not good enough. Carding is still happening, and the data that was collected from carding needs to be destroyed so that data is never used against people. Second, it's absolutely critical, particularly in today's world, that everyone has an opportunity to achieve educational opportunities. And the fact that we thought we had ended streaming in this province in the 1990s, but the fact that I have so many people of color tell me their children are still being streamed out of academic programs, out of the areas in which they can succeed, that far too many black students are being sent home or suspended at rates that are completely
The question will first be answered by Andrea, then Mike, and then Kathleen. If you discovered that only 7 students out of every 10 were graduating from high school, and barely half of those who graduate do so with subjects and grades that do not qualify them for university, that 42% didn't even apply to go to university or college. And of those who applied to university, only 1 in 4 were accepted. Now, faced with those crushing statistics, would you not declare this a provincial crisis in education and demand improvement? Well, those are the stats for black students in the Toronto District School Board in 2011, and the lived experience of blacks across the province. Of every 100 black students slated to leave high school, only 69 graduate. Of those, only 18 end up in university or college. The numbers are worse for black boys. Meanwhile, half the student expulsions are black kids. As Premier of Ontario, what do you plan to do about this abject failure of our schools to educate black students?
Thank you for the question, Royson. And I think the very first thing that you have to do is admit that there is a problem. And I don't think that that admission has been clear enough here in the province of Ontario. Look, we know the stats. Royson has repeated them for us once again. But we don't see the change happening. We don't see the change happening. These stats aren't new. It's not like this is something new that the community is facing. In fact, I'd suggest that it's been getting worse and not better, and that's absolutely unacceptable. And so we need to name the problem as we've obviously done, but we need to make sure that we are dealing with the curriculum in our schools, the processes in our schools, the supports that our students need to make sure that the successes are there. And that means that, yeah, when kids go to school, they should see some black teachers teaching them too. And absolutely. And when you're dealing with a student who might be presenting with some challenges, then the response shouldn't be to kick them out. It should be to sit and talk with them about what's going on in their lives and what stresses and problems their families might be facing. We know that, unfortunately, we continue to see black people with higher representation in the ranks of people living in poverty in our province. That continues to be a problem. So that's why we've brought forward ideas to help support families. Things like true dental care for everyone, real prescription drug coverage for everyone, decent jobs, decent opportunities for young people. We have a plan for more co-op placements, for example. We need to get young people into the trades, exposed to the opportunity of the trades. We need to make sure that young black children and youth feel like they belong, like they have worth, and like they can succeed and achieve. And that means more supports and funding in our schools, not cutbacks, and it means making sure that we're doing that hard work to give those kids a fighting chance.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, Rayson, those statistics, you know, which we all know, just shows to me how much the status quo is failing our young people, and particularly black students, and especially black young men. And it has to change. And so one of the reasons I got involved in politics and chose probably the hardest path to getting elected you could choose was to change the status quo and to fight to change the status quo, because those statistics are completely unacceptable. And so we have to mandate anti-racism, anti-discrimination, and anti-harassment training in all of our schools for all of our school staffs, so that everyone can go to school and be treated with dignity and respect. We have to, when our students graduate from secondary school and move on to college or university, we need to make sure the financial resources are available for them to succeed, to have the resources they need to provide the services that our students need. And it's one of the reasons that we've taken the position that we have to start talking about how we get our school boards working together, so that we don't spend resources on things like duplicate administration, busing, and buildings, and we actually invested in our kids' classrooms, ensuring that we have the teachers they need, the mental health supports they need, the educational assistance they need to succeed.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen Nguyen.
So there is absolutely no doubt that there is more structural change that's needed. There's absolutely no doubt. You know, we've put in place the first ever Education Equity Action Plan. We recognize that there is more training, more mentorship that is needed for teachers, for kids, to help them to know what the opportunities are, and to help them to be exposed to all of those opportunities. The Ontario Black Youth Action Plan is about those organizations on the ground helping kids, not just with community activities, but helping them to find a pathway to success that includes education. And so the money, the $47 million that we're putting into those supports is part of that. $116 million that's being targeted for mental health supports for kids from racialized communities. The raising of the minimum wage, making sure that families have childcare. All of those initiatives are their poverty reduction issues, their economic development issues, and it's about making sure that every family in this province has the access that they need. But the black community in particular, black communities, that they see the pathways and that they have the supports in the schools and in the community, because those things are connected. The school's not an island. We have to make sure that we're working both in the school, in the community, so that kids feel and see that pathway to success. One of the things that we did early on was put student success teachers in schools, but I think what we need to look at now is, are those teachers getting the training that they need? Do they have the cultural competencies that they need? And that goes for the child welfare system as well as the education system. All of that work is underway right now.
You do know that whatever you're doing isn't working.
I said,
Yep.
Absolutely. I get that.
And the question sort of suggests that the people who are responsible for a school system, do they have a sense of urgency and that this is a ridiculous situation and this is really a provincial emergency?
Well, Royce, and I think, well, I take it you're asking me that question.
Well, you or whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact is that we've been in government, and I get that there is a huge frustration, and I feel that frustration, you know, because we have been putting,
15 years.
So, I get that is going to be that's going to be Andrea's theme. I get that, Andrea. You're going to say that
I have more
a million times. I get that.
More themes.
But the reality is that I got into this business because our education system had been stripped by the previous government. We've been building it up. I know there's more to be done. I know that we're not there. We've got huge problems. But the fact is that we are tackling these problems head on. You know, free tuition is part of tackling the issues that kids don't have access to post-secondary.
It's not free.
Okay.
You're right. You're right.
Okay. Free and almost free and sometimes better than free tuition.
Not free,
it depends
actually.
where you are.
It's not.
Wow.
So, not free.
So here's the thing. Why can't we just stop streaming at schools?
Yeah, exactly.
Why can't we just have the education support the kids in the classroom? You know, why don't we have a social worker in every school? Why don't we have arts programs in every school to make sure that children can explore all of their gifts? We should have those things. We should have those things in schools. And so, yes, there are many ways I think that we can improve on what's been happening in this province. New Democrats are dedicated to doing that. Our platform's coming out very, very soon, and it is a transformational document that really does focus, focus on the change we need.
Thank you very much.
Change for the better.
Let's move on now to another stubborn issue, this criminal justice system. By most measures, black people and other racialized and indigenous peoples are being killed, surveilled, and overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Recent data shows that black people in jail waited longer for trial than white people charged with the same offense, sometimes close to twice as long. Carding is still a sore point, as some of you have mentioned before. Police say that they rarely do card anymore. Yeah. But everywhere that Justice Tulloch goes with his public consultation group, he hears the same complaint. Blacks are still being targeted and stopped by police. They're not being offered the Know Your Rights information, and they're not receiving a receipt detailing the reason for the stop. So the question, how do you reconcile those two solitudes? What policies will your party implement to rid us of what most people in this audience believe is systemic inequality in the criminal justice system? And specifically, will you eliminate street checks, not just regulate them? Starting with Mike.
Yes, Rayson, we absolutely should eliminate carding, period, full stop, it's over. The data collected through carding should be destroyed to protect the people whose data, who are affected by that data. Our police services should have mandatory anti-racism training, more training to de-escalate conflict, and better training to deal with mental health issues. Our juries need to be fair and equitable. So we would actually propose changing the way in which the jury pool is put together to not make it from property roles, but actually from OHIP roles, so we have a more diverse community in which to select jurors. And finally, we need more diverse hirings in our police force so they're more connected to our communities.
Kathleen, yes.
Yes. So, on carding, and I know that there are many of you in this room who have given us input, and we've worked with you. And I will be the first to admit I sat at the policy tables and listened to the issues on both sides of this issue, and we have worked to find a balance. And you know, the notion that random street checks would happen, random carding would happen, is unacceptable. And the regulation that we have put in place does not allow that. It does not allow random street checks. Now, is it still happening? I think it is still happening, yes, exactly. And that is a culture shift that has not been completed. And I agree with Mike that there needs to be more training for police officers. You know, they are going through this and trying to figure out how to do it. They're changing behaviors that were unacceptable behaviors, but they're having to change to new behaviors. So we work to find a balance between allowing police officers to do their jobs and making sure that they were not overreaching and treating people randomly and unfairly as they had been. So we're gonna continue to work to solve this challenge.
Okay.
Well,
all right. Okay.
I hear what you're saying. That's what the regulation is intended to do, and we're going to make sure if it's not happening, if that's not happening, then we're going to work to see how we can modify that.
Andrea?
Okay?
We've said unequivocally that we will ban carding in the province of Ontario. It is unconstitutional and it has no role to play in a fair and free society. Look, it's not about balance. The balance has been unfavorable to the Black community for decades and decades and centuries. And so balance is not what it's about. It's about fixing the imbalance that has occurred for far too long, and so we're not afraid of doing that. Look, when I go to a group of young people in the Black community here, in this community actually, the Youth for Youth initiative, and I sit and talk to them when we were trying to push the government to put together the anti-racism directorate in this province, and hear the stories of those young people asking me, well, once the carding is banned, how are we going to deal with it? The police are still going to approach us, and if we don't give them information, then the next time they're around the block, we're going to be worried that they have a target on us because we didn't give them the information that they wanted. Now, this is what young Black men are saying is their lived experience day in and day out, where they're at a park sitting on a bench, and the older white man on the bench next to them doesn't get even a second look, and yet the minute the police officers walk by, they're right on that young Black youth that's sitting on a bench minding his own business. This is the culture shift that needs to occur, and it only occurs with a very clear message that carding is not acceptable, it should not be part of policing, and what we need to do is respect each other and respect young people. Because yes, guess what? They have something to offer, and most of them are great kids, right? And so let's build them up instead of tear them down. Let's tell them they're worth something instead of telling them they're not. Let's show them that they belong, yes, in the park bench, yes, at the corner store, yes, in the university, yes, in the high school. They belong everywhere.
Thank you, Andrea Horwath. Now we have a follow-up question from Desmond Cole. So Desmond, could you state that question, please?
Okay. Sorry, I'm over here.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, quick.
Hi, Desmond.
Good evening. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I wrote this down. This has been touched on a little bit already, but to get even more specific, police in large municipalities such as Ottawa and Peel Region now say that they are only conducting a handful of what they call street checks. We know it as carding, but that they're only conducting a handful of those stops every year. For example, in Ottawa, a city of over 1 million people, police say
Can I go?
Sure.
Desmond, thanks for, I want to thank you for the question, and I want to thank you for your advocacy, because you're a strong, important voice. Do I accept those statistics? I think that we are in the midst of a transition. So I don't know whether those are accurate or not. I don't know if those are accurate or not. I honestly can't tell you. I can't tell you whether those are accurate or not. And look, I know, you know, what Andrea has said is it's a very coherent riff on carding. It's very coherent and it's very appealing. But the reality is...
It's more than a riff.
Well, except it's... You know what, Andrea? It doesn't tackle the real challenge of making those attitudinal shifts, of changing people's behavior, of changing people's understanding. And I would love to say, I've got a magic wand, and we are going to ban that practice, and it's never going to happen again. But the reality is that we have to find a way to allow the fair and just police work that needs to happen in our communities, and it gets at, well, okay.
Thank you.
It gets at the trust between, those young kids you're talking about, the black community, and the police. And I just want to say, the person who has said that he's going to bring back carding and stop even trying to sort this out isn't even here tonight.
True.
So that's what we have to recognize.
Good. Now the other two candidates, can you quickly answer what Desmond put to you? Which was, do you believe the stats, the latest?
Desmond raises the issue, though, and it's an important one about what kind of information is being gathered in terms of how police forces are reporting. Is there consistency across all of the police forces, and where is that requirement of consistent reporting and information? And I think that's work that absolutely needs to be done, and it's.
I can't imagine how those numbers could be any way accurate. Like I've had more conversations with people who have, said they've been carded than what those numbers show. So it's clear we need a complete overhaul of the data collection system so we can actually start having accurate numbers, so we can actually make real decisions that benefit our community.
And which is also supposed to respect the diversity of communities and involve them in the implementation, the planning, and the development, and so forth. And so despite these legislations, these are currently existing legislations, members of the black community, second next to probably the indigenous community, experience a significant burden as it relates to health.
Yeah.
We are twice as more likely to have diabetes, hypertension, and the complications thereof. In terms of mental health, the funding allocated for mental health services for the black community are significantly lower than they are for the white community. We find that HIV and AIDS, the number of incidents in HIV, newly diagnoses, 65% of them are black women in the province of Ontario. So despite, not to mention, many of us when we go to frontline healthcare services, there are experiences of anti-black racism which further impacts the outcomes that we receive. So despite the existing legislation that's in place and the experiences of many of us in the community, there's a clear imbalance. So my first question is really, what will you do as a premier, as a leader, to rectify and create an accountable healthcare system which is going to reverse this trend?
1 minute, please. Yes.
Yeah, so I know that, and thank you for your work, because I think you have been, you've been pushing to make sure that health data are collected as we look at the statistics. You've got some statistics, but we haven't yet got health data being collected, race-based health data being collected, and so we will commit to do that. We are committing to do that. In fact, local health integration networks now have health equity as part of their mandate, so that is a shift. But look, there is, there's more that we need to do in terms of targeting resources. I talked earlier about mental health dollars that we are targeting specifically to youth, racialized youth. And I think that if you look across all of the initiatives that we've put in place, we're taking part of those funds and we're saying, you know what, it's not good enough to expect that they're just going to, deal with the equity issues unless we target them. So the same goes for mental health, and same goes for gathering those health data.
Okay, Andrea.
Thanks, Royson. Look, there are some organizations that are doing some great work to try to make sure that the access to healthcare services are available. And so the community health centers, for example, I think about Taibu particularly, who's doing a lot of great work, absolutely, to meet the needs particularly of the black population. And we can mandate LINs to do that work, but unless we're following up and measuring whether in fact they're having any impact whatsoever on health equity, mandating them to do so is really not very effective. But what I can say is this, the plans that New Democrats have will help the black community. We will help everyone to be able to get the dental care that you need, no matter how old you are, no matter where you live, no matter where you work. Prescription drugs for everyone. So if you're a 45, 55-year-old person and you have hypertension or diabetes, you're not going to be left on your own. You're going to have your prescription drugs covered because that's what's necessary for your overall health. So we don't pick and choose about who's able to access the programs that we think everybody needs. Everybody needs them. Everyone's going to get them. But it's not just that. It's making sure that you're providing the kind of access. So not just the overall program, but the specific access at the community level, which is why organizations like Taibu and others will continue to get the support of New Democrats. It's just not a matter of, providing people the opportunity. It's making sure they have access, and that's something we're very committed to.
Thank you. Mike, your turn.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that the status quo parties face in Ontario is the inability to think about how we can transform our healthcare system to make it more about promoting health and preventing illness instead of just treating sickness. So I'm so happy the framing of your question was so important. So what does that mean? British Columbia spends 3 times more money on preventing illness than Ontario does. They have a healthier population because of it, which then puts less pressure on our acute care systems and our hospitals. So we need to invest more in nurse practitioner-led clinics, community health centers, family health teams, more holistic, stronger primary health care in our communities. And finally, we have to start looking at health care through what's known as the social determinants of health. Poverty contributes to health care. Mental health, having a place you can afford to call home contributes to your health care. Having streets that are safe for pedestrians and cyclists to actually travel on has a huge impact on your health care. So let's start thinking about preventing illness instead of just treating it.
Go ahead.
So I just want to jump in for 1 sec, because the things that my friends here are talking about are exactly what we're doing. So we're building the community health centers. The resources, well, but I know it's not enough. I know that we're not there yet, but we have to be realistic about what is actually happening. Those community health centers, Taibu, the money that we're talking about, mental health money, it's those community agencies that money is going to.
Do you agree with that, Andrea?
Look,
it's not a matter of agreement, that's what's happening.
But it's been 15 years and we haven't seen the kind of change that we need. And I actually agree absolutely with Mike. We hear from the RNAO every single year about the social determinants of health. We hear about the overrepresentation of black people in the ranks of people living in poverty. That's not acceptable. And so we can't just continue to hear about these statistics and not put effective government programs programs in place to make the change happen. Change for the better.
Thank you, thank you. Okay,
Can I just say one thing really quick? I'm sorry. I know I'm the third wheel over here, but no, seriously, like I don't have a seat at Queen's Park, so but that my role is to stir the pot a little bit here. And I know I'm not going to be premier, but I think I can be an effective opposition leader. And so I would like one of the two people over here, could we commit to just reaching BC's targets for health promotion and illness prevention? Could we do that? That's what I would like to fight for.
I think you know what, Mike?
NDP government, guaranteed.
Thank you, Mike. We must go to the next question.
Great idea.
We have a follow-up. We have a follow-up question here, and I think we're even presenting it in French and English. So let's go.
Okay. Hello. Okay. All right. Push me forward. Okay.
This
Hello.
is Nakia Lee Foon,
Yes.
right? Wonderful.
Hello. Good evening. Bonsoir. Je m'appelle Nakia Lee Foon, and I am the Vice President of the Black Health Alliance. Oh, okay. I'm coming closer. Okay, I'm stopping.
Okay.
Bonsoir, je m'appelle Nakia Lee Foon, et je suis la vice-présidente d'Alliance Santé Noire. So my follow-up question, as was said, is going to be said in English and in French. So my question to you is, if elected, will your government commit to develop a population-focused
CB24 is another thing they need for their own stuff.
So
I know, but can you keep for, okay, I don't need no. I just want to get
asking
for it, that's why. It's okay, they asked you, then we gave them, just keep for 10 minutes.
10 minutes? De développement, une stratégie de santé basée sur la population noire en Ontario. Merci. Thank you.
Et ce moment, pour nous, c'est très important d'avoir les statistiques pour développer une stratégie pour la population noire, mais aussi d'avoir l'information accurate, je ne sais pas le mot pour accurate, mais pour alloquer les fonds pour améliorer les situations spécifiques dans toutes les populations en Ontario. C'est la raison d'avoir un anti-racism directorate pour travailler avec tout le gouvernement, avec tous les ministères pour développer cette stratégie. Yes, the work that we're doing right now to develop statistics, to gather statistics, to develop a strategy that actually is accurately targeted is exactly our intention.
So I'm glad that the question.
And he went to Ottawa to develop a pharmacare plan based on the OHIP Plus plan that we have in Ontario for kids and then for seniors next year that allows access to 4,400 medications, all the medications that are on the formulary. So he's going to work at the federal level, having launched the program here in Ontario.
Let's hope if the feds ever get involved in a pharmacare program for the nation, they don't leave out everybody from the age of 25 to 65.
And they don't.
So having said that, just on the question that was asked by Kaylee, look, it is obvious that the current situation where the Premier talked earlier about ensuring that the LHINs have a health equity lens or mandate isn't working. So absolutely, we know that the Francophone community health centers as well as the other community health centers in our province are very much on the ground, on the front lines, working with the Black community in every part of our province, in my community in Hamilton, here in this great city, and all around Ontario. And that important work needs to be supported. But the existing systems don't seem to be addressing the inequities that continue to exist in our health system. We just need to look to Brampton, where we have the most significant crisis when it comes to a hospital overcrowding in a burgeoning, growing community that happens to be mostly newcomers, and somehow they can't get the kind of hospital care that they need because the government has not been paying attention to exactly that. Population-based health investments, which needs to happen.
Thank you, Andrea.
So I agree that population-based health programs need to develop, and the data needs to be collected so we know what action to take. But it's also one of the reasons I'm such a huge supporter of investing more in community health care. You know, yesterday I was at the Community Health Center in Guelph for a soup lunch that was put on for the community. And that's a healthcare center that knows the needs of their community because they're a part of their community, they're invested in their community, and they're delivering the program.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful improvements to our community. But the construction is threatening to destroy black businesses in the area around Oakwood Avenue, also now known as Little Jamaica. Many business owners who have been part of the community since the 1970s are seriously considering closing shop, which could remove a vital and historic portion of Toronto's Caribbean community and usher in gentrification. Did the province do enough to insulate these businesses? And as Premier, what will you do retroactively and immediately to salvage these businesses and prevent their displacement?
Thanks very much, Royson. I think that there's a couple of pieces here. One is that the community benefits agreements that are put together when these major infrastructure projects are undertaken need to be effective, and so we need to make sure that local communities are benefiting from the jobs that are being created on these projects. So that's one piece. When it comes to the local small business communities, you know, I was a city councillor in Hamilton, and we saw major changes in our downtown when I was there. And one of the things that we did was before the project even started, we made sure that the phasing of the work was such that no business was left swinging kind of in the wind without any access for long periods of time. And if that hasn't happened here, then shame on those folks that have done this work and not taken into consideration the need for access to customers or access to businesses by customers. That's the kind of work that needs to be done in advance. What we're stuck with now, I'm going to have to sit down and talk to the community about where things have ended up because we don't want to see the loss of business. We don't want to see the loss of you know, small black community businesses being the result, the legacy of this very important project.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, so when I travel communities across Ontario and there's major infrastructure projects like this is a concern I hear over and over again from small business owners. And so I think it's absolutely critical that we start having a fund that's part of the infrastructure fund that provides cash flow relief to small businesses to help them survive these major disruptions. Because once transit is built, it's oftentimes benefits local businesses, but we can't have the local businesses going out of business while the transit's being built.
Of Black history and culture in Southern Ontario has come from the Black community for many years. Concurrently, our artists and entertainers and cultural entrepreneurs fill the provincial coffers with taxes generated from festivals like, can I still call it Caravana? Afrofest, Jamaica Day, Jambana, Jerkfest, Rastafest, and many others. And we've started a coalition to actually make a case about how we're working on.
Awesome.
Band, the OBHS, and Buxton Museum in Chatham, where I spent a lot of my time when I was at the University of Windsor, continues to provide significant education and edutainment, we call it, experiences for Ontarians to learn about Black culture. If elected, what will you do to make the museum not just a dream, but a reality? And more urgently, what plan do you have for sustained funding and promotion of Black arts and culture to the benefit of Ontarians for the 1.4 million visitors we bring into this province every year?
benefits those communities economically, and therefore those communities should receive funding to provide those benefits. And absolutely, I'm with you 100% on fighting for the museum.
So, two parts to your question. In terms of the sustained arts funding, we have just increased the Ontario Arts Council by $50 million over the next few years, and part of that money is targeted at racialized communities. So, Black arts is part of the mandate for investing that money. I love the idea of.
If you get it,
I think that's a great idea. I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen a proposal. I don't know. You said the coalition is coming together, so if I'm back in this chair, I absolutely would like to see what the proposal looks like. I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Denise, for the question. It's an important one, and I think that we have to always remember that commitment to arts and culture needs to be starting in the schools and carried on throughout community. So that's a big commitment that we have. But look, the other thing that we need to talk about is not just the Ontario Arts Council or the Ontario Media Development Corporation. What do those organizations look like? Who are on the boards of those? Every year of granting dollars, there needs to be an equity lens put on those grants. These are the kinds of systemic changes that we need to look at. And when it comes to the museum, long past due. The museum was promised a long time ago. It should be up and running now. We're there for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. So, we're going to turn some of these questions over to you, the audience. Can the people at the microphone make themselves seen?
That would be me.
So, what we'd like to do is, there's a youth group here that has a youth question. Where are you? Why don't you go to Marva immediately first at the top.
The youth.
And there
Sorry, sir, no offense, but
hold it. There hasn't been a seniors question either. So if there's a seniors question, you go right after youth. Okay, youth first. Where's that person with the youth question? And then the seniors right after, and then it's a free-for-all.
I just want to remind you, in terms of how long you have for the questions.
1 minute. Total.
In total, so 30 seconds is your ask. And then the response.
Right.
So I'm going to remind you of that again, okay? So we can get as many people in as possible. Look behind you. Your neighbor's going to give you the stink eye if you're going to go on for a long time.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here with Generation Chosen. And we are a group here based in Jane and Finch area, and we are advocates for mental health and emotional intelligence, and this is my question. At Generation Chosen, as a youth mentor in training, I've helped counsel many racialized youth in the Jane and Finch area who, as a result, they've been experiencing depression, anxiety, moodiness, and stress. They have often revealed that their emotional status are a result of relationships at school between themselves and their teachers, or themselves and their peers. At Generation Chosen, we believe that the lack of mental health advocacy and emotional intelligence training is one of the major contributions as to why youths we serve nowadays feel emotional and abandoned and categorized as problems. So my question is, what will you do, or what will your parties do to ensure that mental health standards are being maintained within the education system so that our youth don't have to feel marginalized, mistreated as they currently do? And what are you willing to do to put your money where your mouth is, or our money where your mouth is, to help us out?
Kathleen Wynn.
And yes.
Okay, Kathleen.
And before the response, I'm just going to remind you, for those who have questions prepared, the preamble can't be that long. It was wonderful, and I know, and I love that it was so well prepared, but we have neither.
30 seconds, let's go.
So do you want, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. And, you know, the awareness of mental health challenges has just increased exponentially over the last number of years. So we are catching up as a society, not just as government, but as a society. We've got a mental health strategy, $2 billion, $116 million specifically for racialized and more marginalized young people. But we also are putting mental health workers into schools. We had mental health workers in school boards, but they're going into high school, so we're increasing the funding so that there will be more resources right in your school.
Thank you. I actually would say that the high school piece is an important piece, but I think a lot of young children are experiencing a lot of trauma at the grade school level. We need to have educational assistants and social workers and access to counselors at the elementary panel as well. And the funding needs to be there to support those resources because those kids need to have that support.
So I think it's absolutely unacceptable that 12,000 kids are on a waiting list right now to access mental health services. It's completely unacceptable. I think we should be looking at having mental health services be covered under OHIP. And in the short term, at the very least, if people who have to access through private services, let's at least take the provincial portion off of the HST charges for mental health, private mental health service providers. And one of the reasons we are advocating ending duplication in our school system is to actually free up more resources to invest in our classrooms. Because you should have the support you need to have a high quality education, and we want to prioritize investments in your classroom.
Thank you, Mike.
So Mike, that's code for one school system. That's code for no Catholic school system, just so we understand.
That is integrating. That is integrating our school systems and unifying our school systems and using the resources to improve schools for everyone, whether you're in the public system or the separate system.
Okay. Just making that clear.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Premier. We have another young person who has a question. I will be getting to other folks. We just want to prioritize a couple of youth questions. We know some burning things up. We will. He doesn't want to leave here, and so we're respecting that.
Hello, my name is Javon. We're from Laurie. And my question for you guys, Laurie.
What's his name?
My question for you guys is, will your government commit to finding ways to facilitate ways in which schools can be held accountable based on their scores for failing Black and other marginalized youth and their educational system through streaming, suspensions, and expulsions?
Absolutely. Both the suspension and expulsion situation that we have in the school system is absolutely unacceptable. The overrepresentation of Black youth in expulsions and in suspensions it should not be happening. There's obviously systemic racism issues that are happening in our schools, and they need to stop. So yes, we will absolutely work to eradicate that situation and to make sure that young Black youth feel that they have opportunity to succeed at school and the supports that they need to achieve that success. That is absolutely absolutely important and needs to happen. But the other piece is that the supports need to be there. And so we've seen cuts to educational supports over the years. We've seen schools being closed in low-income and poor neighborhoods, and that's not acceptable. Sometimes those schools are the glue of the community, and we need to make sure that they're there. So when we talk about things like the opportunity for community hubs, that's another place where we can engage community in making sure that their built assets are there to support their young people.
Thank you, Andrea. Mike?
Absolutely. It has to change. And it's one of the reasons mandated anti-racism training in schools is so critically important. But I also want to just have a moment here, just to follow up on the last conversation.
Short moment.
The short moment is we can talk about the investments we want to make, but we also have to be honest about how to pay for it. And so that's the conversation I want to have as well. And I'm happy to do that in some follow-up questions, because I know my time is limited.
Yeah, so I just, to the young man who asked the question, sorry, I didn't hear your name, but we made some changes to the suspensions and expulsion rules. I don't think they've gone far enough. We've put, contrary to what Andrea was saying, we've actually put more resources into schools. We've got more teachers than in our recent budget. We're putting more guidance counselors into schools, more supports. But the reality is that it goes back to the training, the ability of classroom teachers, support staff, administrators to understand how to how to react appropriately. You know, I agree with Andrea that when there are situations, many situations could be dealt with right in the classroom or in the school without going into a disciplinary process. But that means that there has to be the right training, and I would say that it's uneven across the system at best.
Thank you. So now we go to, I see an iconic senior. Yeah, I hear you, but we can't do follow-ups. Okay,
no,
sorry.
But you know what? Here's the issue. Accountability can only happen. You're right. When we have the data, that is part of the work that Michael Cotto is doing to get that data, so that we know the magnitude of the problem. We know what's actually happening school board by school board, because not all school boards collect the same data, and we're setting a standard so that that will happen.
Thank you, Premier. We need to be mindful of others who want to ask questions. Thank you so much.
My question is about poverty. And a program was set up, I think, in Peterborough and Hamilton to a guaranteed annual basic wage so that we can deal with inequities in poverty. Is there any way of expanding that kind of program? So for instance, in the GTA, we know that black people and racial minorities suffer this inequity. Is there a way of considering expanding such a program so that black people in this area can benefit from that project?
So I think it's
jump in, whoever.
Okay. So I think it's clear that the Ontario Basic Income Project is something that is a great investigation. I am certainly prepared to support that if I become Premier on June 7th, continue on with the Basic Income Project and see what kind of information it provides us as to whether or not it is the solution. But let's face it, the Conservatives back in the late 90s cut social assistance rates by 22%. Here we are in 2018, and that injustice continues to fester in our province. There's lots of talk about anti-poverty, but last year, 2017, Toronto became the child poverty capital of Canada. After 15 years in government, a lot more action could have been taken on poverty, not only on people's incomes, but on their ability to afford a roof over their head, ability to afford their hydro bills, ability to afford food on the table for their kids. Parents and families are making choices that they shouldn't have to make, and then when they're struggling and they just can't make it, the next thing you know, the Children's Aid Society's knocking on the door trying to take the kids away. Absolutely problematic. We can fix it, and I'm looking forward to our platform. You'll see it soon, and you'll be proud of it.
So we as a society have been talking about a basic income for 35 years. We've put this pilot in place. It's very important information that we will gather from this pilot. But at the same time, we're making changes to our social assistance support. So in our budget, you will see that we are changing the rates significantly for single adults who were the most disenfranchised group in the system. We're increasing the amounts that people can own and earn before they qualify, and we put in place the Ontario Child Benefit, which has lifted thousands of kids out of poverty. So there's more to be done, and we can learn from the basic income pilot and apply that knowledge to our social assistance system, and that's exactly what we'll do.
Thank you for keeping time as well. Appreciate that.
Do I get an opportunity though? So I'm a huge supporter of basic income guarantee. The Green Party's been pushing this for years, but we can't allow it to be an excuse not to address poverty
right now while the pilot is in place. And so we've never recovered from the social assistance rate cuts that the Harris government brought in. We've literally never recovered from them. So at the very least, we need to raise the existing social assistance rates to the low-income cutoff level, or at least to the level that is part of the basic income pilot. So everyone in Ontario, especially those who are living in poverty, can start to pull themselves out of poverty.
Okay, so we got a long list, right? And
yes.
I'm going to ask you to direct your question maybe to one of the three, and then we'll go to the next question, okay? Or else we will not get through this.
Absolutely.
So the next speaker, please direct your question to one of the candidates, and we have a short 30-second response.
And I might say very quickly, there is no line. I'm running around to your seats wherever you are. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that based on hands up and priorities, okay? So there's no line. Otherwise, we'll be here all night.
Let's go.
Thank you. Oh, my name is Kwabena, and I'm a taxpayer and a voter. So, it's excellent that we're hearing a lot about education. But we can't talk about education without the education funding formula. The first funding formula was introduced in 1972. Let's fast forward to the Rosansky report in 2002. The Harris government agreed that they would review the funding formula every 5 years. Rosansky's report also said the same thing. Up until this time, I haven't seen or heard about a review of the funding formula. Premier Wynne, what are you doing? In terms of the broken funding formula in education, you heard the young children, you heard everybody about education. I hear nothing but talk. So what are you doing to review the funding formula and improve it for our education in Ontario?
It's a great question. We review the funding formula every year. We change the funding formula every year. Not only do we change the amounts and increase funding, we change the way those regulations work. So every single year since we've been in office, when I was the Minister of Education, when Mitzi Hunter was the Minister of Education, we changed the way money is allocated. And you'll remember in 1972, boards had a local levy and they raised funds. And you know what? The reality is that that led eventually to a really, really unequal education system across the province. There were some boards where kids were being funded at $4,000 a year. There were some per pupil. There were some boards where kids were being funded at $10,000 a year, and that was not fair. So we review the funding formula every year. It's been changed consistently, and we'll continue to change it year over year as the needs in the province change.
Okay. But I would just say the annual review isn't working because our schools are underfunded right now.
Well, another question.
Next one. All right, next question, please.
My name is Amanda. My question is about affordable housing in the GTA. What next are we going to do to make housing more affordable for first-time buyers and for people entering the market for the first time? As right now, it's still too expensive, even though there's a drop in some of the housing types. What next are we going to do?
Thank you for making it just a question.
So I don't know if you were somebody directly that you were asking the question to.
Andrea.
That's a thanks. But that's an extremely important question because we know so many people are now in a situation where they have no hope of ever buying a house in the neighborhood they were raised in, raising their families in the neighborhoods that they were raised in. And so the government's done a few things that have cooled off the market, and that was good. But we still see housing completely unaffordable. So we're talking about a number of different pieces. We're talking about trying to curb the flipping that continues to occur here in our province. We're looking at other types of affordability, so more cooperative housing, for example, get back into building affordable housing for communities again because people need it. Supportive housing, particularly for seniors and people that are having challenges in terms of living independently. All of these things are great ideas. We need to put them back on the table and make sure people can afford to live in our communities again.
Inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, I want to do the right thing on inclusionary zoning.
Well,
we'll actually overhaul the inclusionary zoning to make sure it works for municipalities and builds more affordable units in those private developments.
So we got 4 minutes to go and about 24 questions. So let's go to the next one, please.
Thank you. My name is Sandy. I'm from Black Lives Matter, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with my colleagues from La N. We've been working a lot to try to get police officers out of school. This is a huge problem because they tend to target our kids, and we've learned through this process that our kids are being carded in the schools by these police officers. They're being talked to by these police officers. Data is being collected from them, and they're not getting consent from their parents first. Now, we got them out of the TDSB. We're now working in Peel. That's about to happen this year. So you know, we could do it one by one, but it'd be really great if the province would just take it on and make it something that doesn't happen. So this question is to Kathleen Wynne. Will you tackle this problem? And for the rest of y'all, you can like slide it in when you have a question.
Go ahead.
You know, I was not a fan of having police officers in schools when I was a trustee. I didn't think that it was a good idea. I think that there are good reasons, as you've outlined, for in many situations police officers not to be in schools. I think there may be some situations where there's a particularly good relationship between particular officers and a school, and I think that we need to not preclude that from happening. But overall, I think the boards need to review this, they need to look at it, and they need to make those decisions, and we need to make sure that they're paying close attention. But you know, I think we need to be realistic that where there are situations where the relationships are good, we should support that. But where what you're talking about is happening, where there are practices that are discriminatory and unfair, then of course that should not be the case.
Okay. Next question.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening.
My name is Jacqueline Dixon. I'm representing GBKM FM Radio. And this question is for the next premier. So I'm going to assume that you will all answer it as if it were you.
Way to go, Jackie.
The black vote in Ontario, it represents the 4th largest voting bloc at a percentage of 5%, with Jamaicans representing over 250,000 of those votes. Of that electorate. My question deals with two sides of our spectrum, our very old and our very young. The Ontario Child Services supports organizations such as the Ontario Children's Aid. It also supports organizations such as the Catholic Children's Aid and the Jewish Children's Aid. Would you support the organization and funding of a black children's aid so that our children do not lose their culture, do not lose sight on their culture, their heritage, morals, and principles that they were raised with? Second question to the twofold.
No, sorry, no. That's okay.
It's a twofold.
No, just one, please, please. No.
It's a twofold question that deals with our seniors.
Just one question, please answer. Please answer that.
So can I just say, Jackie, that I think you've hit on an extremely great idea and one that we absolutely need to take seriously. There has been attempts to ensure that, for example, First Nations communities are able to have control over their own child welfare system, because of course there are more children in Canada right now that are in care across our country than were in residential schools at this point in time. And so it is a shameful situation. And so in Ontario, I have to give credit where credit is due. For many years now, since I think 2005, there has been an attempt to try to ensure that Indigenous communities are able to have their own child welfare system up and running for those very cultural reasons that Jackie described. I think it's a great idea, because we see too much ignorance and too much racism that exists in our child welfare system. We also have to have independent oversight in our child welfare system, which we don't have in this province, and we should have had for a long time now.
So,
thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, this is exactly why we need forums like this for us to listen. Because this is an idea I'd never thought of, actually. And I think it's a brilliant idea. And it's exactly why we should have 4 leaders here listening to the community's concerns.
Thank you.
So, the work...
So we do have, I'm sorry, did we get the question answered?
No, I didn't get to... Okay, I just want to briefly say the work that Andrea was talking about is work that is being done right now. Cultural competency is incredibly important, and if what you're talking about is the best way to go about providing the best care for black kids, then we need to look at all options.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Quickly, please.
So there's one back here.
Quickly.
Hi, good evening. My name is Joanne Joke. I am a labor community activist. My question is to the future Premier of Ontario, whoever that may be.
My question is about privatization. Now, privatization, okay, so to one, I would say to Premier Wynne, my question to you, because we know that privatization has happened in Ontario, Hydro One being one of the major examples that everyone knows about, we all know that the consensus is that privatization will open the job market, but what they're not knowing is that privatization causes part-time precarious work, especially for a lot of our young workers, which I am one of them.
Good.
So my
your
question to you is, are you committed, if re-elected, to making essential services publicly owned and accountable? Because that is important to all of us.
So I didn't hear all the first part of your question, but I'm assuming that you're referring to Hydro One, that's okay. And so I just, I need to say, and Andrea and I have yelled at each other many times across the floor about this, and we're just going to have to disagree. But here's the thing. That was not a decision that I wanted to make. It was very hard, but it was made because I had made a commitment to build infrastructure. I had said to the people of this province that I was going to build roads and bridges and transit. I said that I was going to build up the province, and we could have, you're right, we could have just raised more taxes, we could have borrowed more, but the reality was we needed to make a decision in order to be able to build that transit and that infrastructure. That's why we made that decision. And, we put some safeguards in place to make sure that we had some control over the board and over the CEO, but it was not a decision that was easy for me. It's not one I wanted to make, but the prime mover in that was that we had to get going on building more infrastructure, and that's what we've been doing.
The Financial Accountability Officer, in fact, says that it is the worst way to finance infrastructure projects and will cost us more money. Okay. That's the facts from an independent officer. But look, Bill 175, do you know what that is? That's the new Police Services Act that includes some of the new accountability measures, which I think we all support. But in Bill 75, we have the door opening for the privatization of police services. Now, if we cannot keep police services accountable as when they're public, how the heck are we going to keep privatized police services accountable? It's a very worrisome thing.
We have another question in the back. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Amina. I'm going to ask this question to the next Premier. And we're in the process of legalizing marijuana. What are you willing to do in regards to the youth who have been incarcerated or have been criminalized because of marijuana? Thank you.
The question is, marijuana is now legalized, so what about all those people who've been incarcerated? Do you want to free them?
No, you know what? It is unconscionable that the federal government is going ahead in the process that they're going ahead with. Look, this is Justin Trudeau's problem. And the minute he talked about the legalization of marijuana, it should have been decriminalized at that moment, and it has not been. And so our kids are still going to jail for simple possession of marijuana. Absolutely unacceptable. And I got to tell you this, with all due respect. 40 outlets in all of Ontario, when this becomes law, is not going to in any way deal with the black market, if you want to call it that, or the criminal element that exists in marijuana right now in this province. The plan needs to be overhauled. When I become Premier, I'll do exactly that.
Well, you know that that's the beginning. That's the beginning number, Andrew. You know there'll be many more across the province. Michael Coteau raised this issue at our cabinet table. He talked about this as a real concern. As Andrea has said, it is the federal government that has to look at this. It's certainly something that has been raised with them.
Have you asked them to?
We have raised it. It has been raised with them, and it is something that, as a society, we have to grapple with. But the federal government has to take action if it's going to be taken.
So we have to grapple with the past, but we also have to prepare for the future. Because my fear is we're going to continue to criminalize people for cannabis sales when we only have 40 government monopolies. Why not license local dispensaries, regulate them, keep them safe, and allow people in our communities to sell cannabis in a legal, safe way to get rid of the underground market and create economic development in our local communities?
So, ladies and gentlemen.
We have one last question. And only one person, very brief. Right here.
Given the high prevalence of sickle cell disease in the black community.
We have a question about sickle cell disease back here, please. Thank you.
So given the prevalence of the disease in the Black community, the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario has continued to meet with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and has received promises but with little delivery. If elected, will sickle cell disease be a provincial priority, and if so, how are resources and personnel going to be allocated in order to get to this agenda?
Great question.
So I'm glad you know and you are part of the conversation with the Ministry of Health. That is an ongoing discussion, and it is something that is already a priority. It's already something that we want to tackle. And you know, we talked about population-based health. Those are the kinds of resources that need to be put in place. So keep working with us. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the details of the conversation with the Ministry of Health, but it's certainly something I'll take back to Helena Jasic, because that's exactly the kind of targeted investment and targeted strategy that we need to have.
But sickle cell disease in the Black population is not a new phenomenon, and so there should have been some, I think, some solutions already. And I look to organizations like Taboo, who are doing great work when it comes to reaching out to community and bringing them into the community health center and dealing with the effects of sickle cell disease, and that's what we need to do more of. So yes, it's policy that needs to catch up, if you will, but we also have to not just talk policy, we have to talk action. Not just talk, but action on the ground.
And that's why money is going to those community organizations.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Mike Schreiner, Andrea Horwath, and Kathleen Wynn for a wonderful debate. I know. We covered an amazing number of subjects, and maybe all this tells us is that maybe we should have 2 debates in the Black community, right? I want you to commend yourself, as Miss Lou would say, clap yourself for being very well behaved, and we appreciate your participation.
Gave them 2 minutes closing. Before everyone departs, we're not quite done yet. We're almost done. There will be wrap-up closing remarks. Each of the leaders have 2 minutes for their wrap-up.
I just need 30
Just 30 seconds. 45 seconds for wrap-up. But I wanted to call Velma Morgan, the chair of Operation Black Vote, the leader that helped to make this happen along with the rest of the group. And she has a presentation for the leaders. I also want to say, while she's doing that, thank you so much. I know that many of you had questions that we could not get to. This is a good thing in our community, and we hope to have another one of these so that you can ask some of those questions. We'll also even take your name if possible so that we can send the questions in. And so we thank you so very, very much. This is great. Photos. So 30-second closing, and then Yolanda, Adoma from the JCA is going to give the closing thanks to all of you. And then the group will be up for the group, all our sponsors. So can I turn it over now to the Premier and to Andrea and to Mike?
I'm going to talk for less than 30 seconds. You heard a lot of opinions. You heard a lot of issues raised tonight. What you didn't hear was from the one person who would have disagreed with pretty much everything that the 3 of us said. So the reality is that, folks, you know what? It was great that we were all here tonight, and it was really a privilege to hear from you. But I just ask you to please listen to what Doug Ford is saying on the campaign trail already, and his attitudes on all of the issues that we discussed tonight. He should be here, and he should be held accountable.
I just want to thank everybody for being out here tonight and having such a great dialogue and discussion. Look, I believe that this province is ready for change. The question becomes what kind of change that we're going to get.
And I would suggest to you that there's a good path to go down, and that's change for the better. That's what New Democrats are offering you. I look forward to talking with you throughout the next number of weeks to really bring change for the better to Ontario. Things don't have to be this way. They can be so much better. Let's get that work done together. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I believe this election is about challenging the status quo. And so ask yourself if the status quo is working for you. And I believe the only way to change the status quo in this province is to start voting for a new party with a new vision who's going to do politics differently by putting people first. And that's exactly what elected Greens are doing across Canada and across the world. People, power, change to change the status quo of Queen's Park. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before you go, I want to just take a moment for you to acknowledge and thank the organizers who spent hours and weeks. We talk about that the community doesn't know how to come together. We know how to come together, and we're interested in the issues that matter to Ontarians in our community. And so I just ask all the representatives from the various organizations to step forward and for us to publicly thank them for putting this on. It is not the end, the beginning and the end of the conversation. We will continue, and our vote will count in June.
Is we get live, and we as Kihei and 995 Road after the black community, black leaders debates. And we are now going to be going to our own panel. If you're listening at home, wherever you are now, we are going to be going to our own panel right now, where we got our panel sitting now, and we are going to be talking about what the election is. I want to hand it back to Jacqueline. Jacqueline, I think you should talk to them. I did that one. Tell people about what we have been experiencing today and where we've gone. Go ahead.
Hello, good evening to all of our listeners, local and worldwide. Wow, what an awesome experience this evening. What an opportunity, what an honor for us as a community to come together in this way, representing our issues and bringing our issues to the forefront to the leaders and the individuals that make a difference, the people that are making the decisions on our behalf. We were able to do that. I'm excited. I had a great time. I've got some panel members with me. We're going to have some more panel members join me in a little while. As you can see, based on the live broadcast, the room is packed. We have a packed audience here tonight, and it's hard to navigate around the room, but we're just waiting for the other panel members to arrive as the candidates are just making their way around the room as well, and introducing themselves and saying their pleasantries to the audience. So while I have the opportunity now, and while we're waiting for other panel members to arrive, let me just introduce the panel members who I currently have with me right now and get their feedback as to what they believe took place tonight, and so that we can hear everyone's perspective. So to my right, you're going to introduce yourself as a panel member. Please tell the listeners your name and tell us what brought you here today, and why you are so excited, if you are, to cast your vote in June.
Well, my name is Toyin Ishola, and what brought me here today was actually a friend of mine, George, who said this would be a good way to network. I'm not usually in the black community like that, but I took it as an opportunity to come down here and see what's going on.
Wow, thank you so much. And with the time that you've spent here this evening, would you say that it was well worth it?
Definitely. I believe it's definitely worth it, and I believe there are other questions that are very great that people didn't get to ask. And
yes, so
really,
true.
Really great if we had enough time.
So true, so true. We're going to get back to you in just a bit, but thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for being a member of the panel. So there's lots of stuff that we're going to get to talk about as far as what our experience is concerned. So we're just going to get back to you in just a bit, and I'm just going to introduce to my left now my other panel member, and allow you to introduce yourself and tell us about your experience this evening being here at the first and maybe only Black Community Leaders Debate for Premier.
My name is George Chukwu, generally known as Bluetooth George, and I'm the host of Global Access Entertainment Show on Afro Global Television. Tonight was an incredible night, as a matter of fact. Having seen the turnout here tonight, it was just so touching, and seeing Black people come together to organize such an incredible show here tonight is just amazing. And one of the things that I saw how passionate the leaders were in answering a lot of questions, and it was just very touching. So it is good for me to be here, and I thank JBK FM for having us here and covering this live event. Is just incredible.
Thank you so much, George. It was awesome having you here and sharing the experience with you. Thank you so much for that feedback. We've got some stuff to share. Of course, we're going to get back to you in a bit because I want to get your take on a couple of the answers that the candidates gave. And I know you yourself had a fantastic question that we were hoping to get asked, but who knew that the turnout would be like it was, and that the overwhelming response from the crowd in wanting to ask questions. I had no idea. So I'll introduce our next panel member to my left here, and ask you to please introduce yourself and just tell the listeners a quick response as to what you felt took place tonight and what your experience was like.
Yes, my name is Pastor George. I'm the host of Make It Happen at GBKM FM. Today has been a wonderful day. As we were watching from the crowd, I was very happy with the turnout, with the enthusiasm, and I know that we might be able to translate this into actual going out there and making some changes in our community. So we are very happy. I know you engage at home also, watching on Facebook, watching on Twitter, watching on YouTube. So it was very fantastic, and I'm very happy that we came out in such a massive number. It shows that we can do something if we come together. So I'm very impressed. My initial assessment is that it went out very well. People were engaged, and they asked questions, and the leaders also gave the answers. And you can see that it was an animated crowd. It was an animated audience. It means we're all together engaged in it. So I am very happy because we got across as people, and together we can make things happen. So I'm very happy that we came out in the large numbers, and as I said, this might not be the end. So we're very happy that it's going on. So initially, my initial assessment is that it went on very good. It went on very, very animated.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. George Forgab, for that take on that recap on the experience. And we're going to get back to you as well, because you're another individual who you were prepped and ready to ask some very serious questions. And maybe what we can do is we can ask the questions to our viewers. Maybe they can give us some feedback on the questions that we never got an opportunity to ask. And let's hear their take on the responses that we have, or our thoughts on these issues. Now, my other panel member to my right, to my far right, is Janice, and Janice, if you can just take the microphone and introduce yourself. GBKM family member as well as publisher for Snapped, and she'll tell you all about herself. And Janice, just introduce yourself to the viewers and give us your take on today's experience.
Okay, so thank you, Jackie, very much. And I must say, the question that you asked, Jackie, I think was the question of the night. Many
First, let me stand back. I was so excited by your question. I'm Janice Smith, and I am Lady Boss.
Yes.
And my show comes on every Sunday at 5:30 on GBKM FM. So I came here on an angle of, from a lady's point of view and from a community point of view. And when Jackie, when you asked that question about, having a society for the black children that, perhaps would get lost, that got a rousing applause. So, and even the leaders said they never even thought about that. So that was, I think, to me, one of the highlights of the night was your question.
Thank you so much, Janice, for that feedback. And I'll tell you, just, guys, and jump in anytime you're ready here, where that thought process came from. I looked at the statistical evidence that is there for everybody to see in regards to incarceration of black youth, in regards to the dropout rate for, again, our black children. And I'm trying to put this together to see if this puzzle leads to anything. Or if there was any preempted things that could have taken place prior to the incarceration or the dropping out of children from high school. And George, I'm going to let you chime in. Yes, and the only thing I came to the conclusion or the thought that could this have anything to do with some of our children, unfortunate as it is, being separated from their parents as a result of the Children's Aid Society not having a clear understanding as to how black children are raised. They are raised somewhat differently than Caucasian. Would you agree with me, George, that we have a different set of standards, morals, principles when raising children?
Yes, indeed. We can actually say that to a degree. But to say that we are the victims of our own environment is the word sin. So many questions were asked tonight, and most of them were basically the answers were symptoms of the deep problem that is causing, happening in our community. One of the major problems I have in some of these things, when you are answering questions and dealing with the symptoms, you don't go to the deep roots or the major causes of those issues, like what you were just saying. Yes. Then what happens is a reoccurrence of the same problem again and again and again. So now the major thing is, where do we begin to bring answers to these deep questions? Now, for instance, if children are dropping out of school, is it the problem with the school itself, or is it the problem that is at home?
Very good question, George.
What is the root cause of that particular child not paying attention to in class? Is it because they don't believe in themselves, or maybe out of the abundance of the thoughts that they have about themselves being so inferior in the way that they have been taught, they don't feel like education is important? So we have to deal with the root causes of this problem rather than dealing with the symptoms, and that's exactly what I'm seeing here tonight. So we're going to discuss a little bit more, but number one is, if a mom is not at home to raise the child, then all of a sudden the child becomes susceptible to external guardians. TV will train the child. Other teenagers outside will train the child. So if the mom is at work, or mom is busy doing some other things and not there to train their children, and there is an absentee father in the house, what do you expect generally? So these are the questions that we need to deal with. How do we solve the root causes of these problems and not deal with the symptoms that will have the problem to come again and again and again?
George, I know that Janice is biting at the bit right now. She wants to jump in on this based on what you... based on what you've just said, and I'm Janice. I'm going to let you. I'm going to tag you. You're going to jump right in. But let me just say this one share this piece of information with you based on what you just said, because what you just said is the gospel truth. It really is. We have to deal with the issues from the root. Now, but let me throw this spin on it, George. As a black parent, if I should have issues with my child's behavior, whether it's at home or in school, I might choose to deal with my disciplinary actions in a way that the community at large or society would deem to say to choose to say is unacceptable, or maybe even harbor on what you would say is abuse in certain cases. Therefore, allowing my household to be subject now to investigation by the Children's Aid Society and other authoritative places such as this, who will then come into my household and make a decision as to whether or not they believe I am a good parent based on their standards. So this is where I'm going with that, and I'm going to let Janice just jump in there real quick.
Did you want to respond to it? Did you want to go? You go ahead. You wanted to read?
Yes, I do. One of the major problems we have is lack of involvement in training our children at home. I'll give you an example of what happened one time. I took my two sons to Six Flags, and they were running around, and I kept on warning them. And finally, one of them fell and then, broke something, over where we were. And I went there and spanked him in the presence of the police. And the police came to me and said, "What did you just do?" I said, "I just disciplined my child." And he said, "Why did you do that in my presence?" And I said, "Why not?" And he was angry with me. So he said, "Don't do that again." And I said, "Let me ask you a question. Tomorrow, he grows up and carries a gun and shoots you. Your wife will become a widow. Your children will not have a father. And then all of a sudden, the society will not have you as a police officer helping us out. Which one would you rather choose?" The whole community that was there started shouting, and then he got ashamed and left. So the point about this was, I trained my children at home because I educated them. I don't allow the school only to educate them. And when you teach them the necessity of discipline and the reason why as a parent you must do it, when they tell them otherwise in school, they will understand the parent that is at home, that they know that loves them. But if a parent is not teaching the children at home, he leaves it to the teachers, then they will do what the teachers say rather than the parents.
Fair enough. Janice?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think all good points are raised, but I think there's like also a balance when you say about you can't leave it to the school, and also you can't, that we as parents are the main disciplinary. We're the first teachers and probably the last teachers. But I think one of the important things is as we're educating them, it's working together. It really is. It's sometimes the child may, like for me personally, with one of my sons, it was a teacher that really instilled my values in him. He was going through a rough time, and I was able to bounce off that teacher, but it's the relationship that you have to form. As parents, we have to be in the schools to let them know, what our values are, what we're disciplining them in at home, and that we are actually one the same things. We want them to be educated. We want them to be productive in society, so that when we go and say they see our faces, they will actually almost, I wouldn't say treat the child better, but they will recognize that there's parents at home that they're going to be accountable for, so they will put in the right steps that we would agree with. And so that's what I'm saying about the balance.
Fair enough. Very good point. Guys, I just want to clarify where I was going. Maybe I was a little bit too vague in my question, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from with the formation, the ideal of this formation of a Black Children's Aid Society. You see, prior to a child being removed from a household by the Children's Aid Society or by the Jewish Children's Aid or by the Catholic Children's Aid, there is a process that takes place. They will send representatives from these various different agencies into these homes to speak to them because there's commonality. They have a moral and cultural connection to what is happening in that household. So therefore, they're able to communicate with that parent in an effective way. So as a Jewish child care worker enters into a Jewish home, they will understand more. They'll be able to empathize with the parent. Why is he not studying his Hebrew lessons? Why is he behaving in the way that he's behaving? So decisions can be made that will prevent that parent from being separated from that child because of the understanding that exists with that culture. We don't have that experience. When a person comes into our home to talk to us about how we handle our children, they don't look like us, and they don't have that experience. So it would be very difficult for them to relate to us in our household when we try to explain to them, yeah, I had to, slap Tom, or I had to give him a spanking, or I had to, use some really harsh, words or whatever the case with him, so that he could get an understanding that I want the very best for him. So, and because that happens, we could potentially have our children separated or removed from our household for lack of understanding. And then therefore now they go into a system that doesn't support their culture, it doesn't support their principles and morals that they were raised with, and they lose their identity.
Please go ahead. This is very, very deep. I would say personally, I have had similar experience growing up. The fact that my mom didn't bring me up halfway through, and just coming from Nigeria also, with different upbringing over there and here. And I feel like some of the problem is single parenting, because women are doing things alone, right? And then when you look at it, most of these kids that are really disturbed, it's because their mother are usually busy trying to survive to provide for them. That's one of the problems at home. That's why some of these kids have problems in school. And also when it comes to school, these guidance counselor they have over there, like you said, they don't understand us. They don't. The kind of guidance counselor that are there, I feel like they're not trained well enough to understand other people from different backgrounds, culture. And you are right, it could be a great way to bring in people like us, of our own culture, into the system to help our kids have a better future. Because right now it's going downwards again. It's as it used to be before.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to touch on that topic, or can we kind of let's slide on to some other issues that we chatted about. So I brought up the fact that the black community, which consists of everybody black, represents the 4th largest voting bloc in Ontario. That number, though, as much as it is nice to be the 4th largest voting bloc, that number is realistically, it's only 5%. But it's still enough of a voting bloc to make a difference and to tilt an election and to sway, the outcome of an election. With only 5% of the electorate being black, do you believe that our leaders, when they come to address us, come to us with the ideal of pandering to us? In my opinion, I really do feel like I'm being pandered to when I'm being spoken to by our leaders, and I'll tell you why. The first word that usually comes out of their mouth is free. So for some reason, they believe that we are looking for free things. So they really want to emphasize how many things they plan on doing for us for free. And I feel like that's pandering. I don't know if anybody else has a take on this.
Well, I was going to say, I'm not sure if it's pandering, but one of the things is what you just said about 4% of the vote. I think that has a lot to do with maybe their outreach, because at the end of the day, voting is what matters, and it is our power right now. I mean, a lot of people say, if you talk to a lot of people, they say, why bother vote? But I think if we begin to vote, even some of the issues that were raised today, if they know that we're going to make a difference and vote them in or out, I think they will pay more attention to our issues. So I'm not sure necessarily about pandering. I also think that they go into a small circle. They don't necessarily go deep into the community. They probably go to places, Jackie, where they're always asking what can you do for me? Why, like there's a lot of free healthcare, for example, free schooling. So maybe they begin to think that all of us think in that one thought. And maybe that's why like you are an established woman, you're not looking for free, you're looking for opportunity to grow your business as opposed to, handouts. So I think if we start to let them experience more of our community, maybe that pattern or that thought will change. That's very good.
I believe that to a greater degree it is indeed pandering, because that is the reason why I mentioned that earlier, that some of the answers that we are given, we are just solving the same, they were just solving the symptoms rather than the deep-rooted problems that occur in our communities. Number one thing is, my thing has always been, can we look in the mirror for one moment and ask ourselves some deep, important questions about who we are, our values, and how much we love one another. If you go to Vaughan, you have the Italian community. Anybody from the Italian community that comes to vie for election in that area will automatically win. You go to Brampton, the Brown Indians, the same thing. So now, the question that we have to ask ourselves, why is it that we are not together the way we are supposed to? For instance, one of the questions we ought to be asking here today, where we have little Jamaica, and we have a person over there right now, in Eglinton, and there is nobody representing that particular voice to go and say, okay, our businesses are dying until we came here. So my thing is, why can't we stay together? Why can't we commune together? Why can't we coexist with one another in a place that is called ours, so that we will have a strong voice? You have 5% of the votes, but those 5% are scattered, that in each community is less than 0.0005. So what kind of voice do you have? So if any black person comes from, let's say for instance from Brampton or from Scarborough, and you only have a minute percentage of your people voting for you, and you have other communities that will come and vote for their own person, then what? So that is the deep-rooted problems we have, and we need to begin to solve these things. It is not a one moment answer. It is something that we have to search within ourselves and say, in this mosaic community that we have here in Canada, what are we doing to make our voices strong enough so that we can represent our values and ourselves, so that when we go out there, when we speak, we will be heard? That's one thing we need to start asking questions about.
And I agree with you. It's definitely not a one answer. But when you mentioned about the 4%, that's how much votes. But I think Jackie said we are actually one of the biggest voting bloc. So if we start to use our voting power across, say, the GTA at minimum, then, like you said about togetherness, we can solve some of the problems that are deep-rooted, say, within our communities. But, you're right about, we're scattered, and that if we can somehow manage to collectively get together, I think, and vote, I think that's where you'll really see, some of those issues. Again, it's not an overnight thing, but at least begin to kind of, resolve or solve itself.
Yes. To continue this this topic, what I feel is that first of all, to move from point A to point B, we have to recognize the problems that exist. Then we have to make a plan. So in our community, there's lack of central leadership. What do I mean central leadership? The leadership is scattered, but our leadership needs to be coordinated, and we make a plan. Say in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, where do we want to see our community? So things will not happen by chance. So the other communities that we refer to, they have a plan. They have a 10-year plan. They have a 20-year plan. So we say we are scattered all over. But what area can we influence? We must be able to pinpoint. Now, I agree with Janice that we need to vote. So the time they say the strategic voting, I tell you talk about pandering. Now, this is politics, right? So if our community, we don't participate in politics, decisions are made. Whether we like it or not, those decisions affect us. So if we don't participate, it affects us. So it's better that as I'm talking, as you are listening, we want you to go out, register to vote, make your voice heard. It is very important. And then our voice will be heard.
Thank you so much for that, George. And I totally agree with everyone's comments here today in regards to the splinter within the Black community. As far as our votes are concerned, it's splintered. And it's splintered because the community is splintered as well. We have, as George was saying, we have certain groups within the Black community that represent less than 1%. And you add up all of these 1.2% and 2.5% and 7% and 10%, and that's what makes the Black community. But I also do want to share my thoughts on the fact that I don't believe the Black community, we're not a monolithic vote. We don't just vote because a candidate is Black. I don't want anybody putting up a Black candidate in my writing and thinking that because the person is Black, I'm going to vote for them. You've got to deal with the issues that affect me and my household, and you've got to win me over on the facts and the points that are going to drive my agenda for my household, and I really don't care what color you are. Would I like to think that there could be a Black person that could deliver that message effectively? That would be wonderful. But I don't want any politician to assume that because I am living in an area that is predominantly Black, that they should put up a Black politician and they will automatically get my vote. That's not how I vote.
Okay, please, George, finish your thoughts.
Oh, no, I wanted to say, I wanted to say that we have the leader of the Trillium party here.
So he's actually Bob. He's from the Trillium. So just maybe introduce yourself a little bit. And
thank you so much, Bob.
Yeah, Ricardo says something different, something better. So maybe you can share a little bit about, what your main platform is and about tonight, what your thoughts were on that.
I'd love to share my main platform, and I reflect or share some of the views that were said here today. The Trillium Party was conceived about 4 years ago, basically because there is no democratic representation in provincial parliament right now. We're very fortunate to be the fourth party in Queen's Park right now. Trillium Party has MPP Jack McLaren representing them there. And one of the things, because this is we've been talking about the Jamaican community and fair play across the board. We're the only party that has the Canadian Constitution, which is in the Bill of Rights, in its own Constitution. It's reflected there. But what we're all about is free and democratic votes. Don't you find it really strange and really odd and disconcerting that when all the members in the party will vote for exactly what the leader wants? And that's not correct. That should not be allowed. The Trillium Party, one of my proudest moments will be if we have some people elected, perhaps one in the Beaches, one in the Nickel Belt. And when they vote against each other on something, doesn't mean the government has to crumble. All that means is the person in the Beaches is representing his 100,000 people that he's supposed to represent, or she is supposed to represent. And the person in the Nickel Belt is voting for what they represent. That's what democracy is all about. So the Trillium Party is touting that as one of their big platform planks. Also, the sex education curriculum. Right now, we are against the implementation of the sex education curriculum the way it is. Not because of what's in it. Don't really care about that from the political standpoint. But because we do believe that the parent should be putting the values into their children. One of my greatest pleasures I get is when I meet the children, the adult children of some of my friends, and I go and shake their hand, and I see the same values that father or mother has in the child. I don't want the government values set in there, and that's important to us. We've had it. We've been saying it for 4 years right now, and or 3 years right now, and we've never wavered even once. Everybody right now is trying to flip-flop back and forth. For instance, the leadership review or the leadership run that the Progressive Conservatives just had. Everybody before it was all for the sex education curriculum, and then as soon as the leadership started, they were sort of for it, and then it got to the point where Doug Ford said, no, we're against it. And then all of a sudden, all the leadership candidates were against it. And what happens right now? 6 days after the election, all of a sudden he gets what he wants, and then what happens? He says on Focus Ontario, it's at the bottom of his list in the totem pole. No more flip-flopping, no more back and forth on that. Say what you mean what you say. The Trillium Party is something different, something better. Against us, and when I say us, I mean all the voters in Ontario.
Thank you very much. And Jackie's just about to introduce one of our first of all, thank you for coming. You are very passionate. As a matter of fact, everybody today, one thing you guys have in common is you're passionate about Ontario, passionate about making a difference for everybody in the community, and that's something that we can all appreciate. And Premier Kathleen Wynne is joining us right now, and so we just want to turn it over and just maybe ask you about tonight, and what are the things that, what did you feel about tonight? And you know, you heard the passion in the audience. At some point, it maybe got a little unruly, but it's, again, we're all very passionate about, you know, what we believe in.
So somebody asked me a few minutes ago who won the debate, and I said the community won the debate. You know, because the organizers brought together all of us, well, almost all of us. One major party leader is missing. Doug Ford wasn't there, but Mike Schreiner and Andrea Horvath and I had the opportunity to hear the issues that are the most important to the community, and you know, many of them we knew. But we had the opportunity to hear the angle that the community wanted us to hear, and that's really, really important. And you know, somebody else asked me, well, aren't you frustrated that you've been in office all this time and you haven't solved all these issues? These are really, really challenging issues. You know, systemic racism is something that is being struggled with in so many communities around the world, let alone here in Ontario. So we got to continue to work together. That's what I take away from tonight, is that, yeah, there are really good ideas. There are things that government has put forward. There's funding that is being targeted in schools and in healthcare and in the justice system. Let's make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and let's make sure that we take the next important steps to improve opportunities for all of the kids and all of the families in the Black community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. The Honorable Premier Catherine Wynne. Let me just get two questions in if I can. First of all, I just want to, again, thank you for showing up tonight, because there was somebody that was absent. And that absence of this other candidate, to me, spoke volumes to me and to the individuals in the audience. But I want to reflect back on the campaign, or the 2015 election, where we had, for the first time in 2 decades, an increase in voter turnout. Over 52% of Ontario voters showed up at the polls and gave you a resounding victory. I believe that the Ontario voters, they put their trust in you. They believed that you were going to deliver on many of the things, the issues that you said you would, platforms that the issues that you said that you would. But something has taken place between that time and now, where we've lost confidence for the most part. And as a result of that, now it would appear that you're between a rock and a hard place where the polls are concerned, although there are a lot of people that are still on board with a lot of people that are still on board. We want you to clarify for us, please. You've done some very good things. You've increased minimum wage. You've helped hundreds of thousands of people bring more into their household. You have created programs that have opened up the coffers of the Ontario government that would have allowed small business people, minorities to be able to start up businesses and fund themselves. You've done some wonderful things that I don't believe are being highlighted very well, but you did do highlighted enough. But the one thing that seems to be highlighted over and over and over again is your decision to get involved with the sex education in the school system. If you can clarify that for us so that we have a clear understanding, what is it exactly that you've brought forward? I think that a lot of people could potentially turn around.
So I really appreciate that question because I always say to people that I went through the Ontario education system. So decades ago, we had health and physical education, we had sex education in our schools, and it has to be updated, just like the math curriculum, just like the social studies curriculum. And so what we did was we updated a curriculum that was 20 years out of date, you know, and it had fallen behind. The curriculum that was in place before we updated it, the internet wasn't even a thing. Kids didn't have phones. They weren't communicating with each other and the world through cyberspace. So the sex ed curriculum, as it's written, is about giving kids good information, true information that will keep them safe. You know, it's giving them information about how to say no when they are if they're being preyed upon, or if they're getting information or being approached by someone who they shouldn't be, helping them to understand what's a healthy relationship, what's not a healthy relationship. How do I keep myself safe? So that's what the updated sex ed curriculum is about. And we talk to parents, we talk to social workers, we talk to educators, we talk to police to make sure that we were getting all the safety information, all of the academic information to have that curriculum. Politicians don't write curriculum. You know, that's not who writes the curriculum. It was updated by educators with input from people all over the province. But it's about keeping kids safe and giving them information that's true and real.
Thank you so much for that. So what I'm hearing is that the parent has not lost control. They haven't lost control. For some reason in our community, a lot of people are under the impression that you've taken out their authority to share information like this with their children, and therefore given the authority now to the government to introduce.
Absolutely not. And I guess just to build on that point, so having done all that, we've updated the curriculum, and we were behind other places like Alberta, for example, that had already updated their curriculum. But with all of that, if parents look at the curriculum and they work with their teacher, and there are things that they don't want their kids to be part of a discussion, you know, there are things that they feel we'd rather only talk about that at home, then they can withdraw their kids. That's always been the case in Ontario. People can withdraw their kids for a section of the curriculum. But it means that parents need to have that conversation with the teachers so that they know when certain things are being taught. And I guess the other thing is the health and physical education curriculum, a large part of it is about, you know, keeping yourselves clean and eating good food and getting exercise. That's the most significant part of the curriculum. The sex ed piece is a very small piece. So I would just ask parents to talk with their teachers, talk with the school, get the information so that they understand how this has been written to help keep their kids safe.
Fantastic. Janice? George?
Yes, thank you, Honorable Kathleen Wynne. It's such a pleasure having you here again. And but I have a little question that I want to ask, which will digress from the subject that we have right now. And that question I had wanted to ask earlier, but I didn't have the opportunity. I'm from the Nigerian community, working with Afro Global Television. A few weeks ago, a young Nigerian, a professional, an engineer by profession, just went to work and was on her way, or was on his way home after playing soccer with his friends, and 3 gang members just came and just shot him to death. Innocent cold blood. He was walking towards his car. They claim it was mistaken identity, but according to the information that the police received, they just shot anybody in that community, which was a predominantly black community. We're talking about carding right now. My question is, how can we balance the whole information about carding? If we stop carding people or stopping and questioning, individuals that might belong to a gang, and then we say, okay, let's not do that anymore, let's not question anybody anymore, and the gang membership increases and such black on black crime increases in our community, then who are we going to blame? Are we going to blame the government, or are we going to blame ourselves? So what would you do if you continue in your leadership of this Ontario, if you win the election? What would you do in order to bring balance between carding and then making sure that the community is safe?
Very good question.
So that was what I was trying to get at in my answer. We have banned the practice of randomly stopping people just because of how they look or who somebody may think they are. What we've said is that the new law is that you can only stop someone as a police officer if there's a reason to do that, if there's a suspicion of something real, if there's a rationale for stopping that person. But otherwise, we've stopped the practice. The law has been changed so that you can't just stop someone because they're black. That's not legal. Now, having said that, we're in a period of change. We're in a period of adjustment, and I'm the first to admit that. The stats that were raised tonight, there were thousands of card checks last year and only 3 or some small number this year. Well, I don't know if those numbers are correct. I don't know if the measurement of the stops that were done this year is accurate. But because we're in this time of change, we have to monitor this. We have to monitor whether we've reached the right balance, whether the attitudes are shifting the way they should, whether the behaviors are shifting, and whether the police have gotten the training that they need to actually understand what the new law means. That is the challenge of what we've got here. Tonight there was a very sort of simplistic notion that we're gonna ban this practice. Well, we have banned the practice. We've banned the random street checks. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to have the ability for police officers to do their job. And that's what I was trying to say tonight. And so we're in a period of transition. We're going to continue to work to monitor it.
Thank
you so much. Thank you. Appreciate you.
I'm going to get that question in, Janice. I'm going to let you just get in. I know that we're so fortunate to have the Premier here, but there was a question, there was a two-part question that I was going to ask. I didn't get the opportunity to ask when I posed the question about the Black Children's Aid Society. I said there was a second part to my question. And the second part to my question goes like this. The Black vote is not a monolithic vote. We don't just vote based on the fact that an individual is Black. We have, in many cases, especially if you're from a Caribbean background, we are now 3-4 generations here. We have parents now that are getting elderly, that are growing old, as just like the rest of the society is. And my question, the second half of my question was dealing specifically with the fact that government, just like government has funded the Jewish Children's Aid Society and the Catholic Children's Aid Society, and they provide funding for those organizations, I wanted to know if you or anybody who is going to be the next Premier would also provide funding for a Black Children's Aid Society in order to ensure that that child stays connected to their cultural background and they do not lose their identity. That was the first question. But the elderly part of the equation is this. As our seniors, as our parents grow older, and very likely some of them, a good number of them, will be moving into nursing homes and elderly care. Would you support a group of individuals like myself, a conglomerate of individuals like myself, creating an elderly home focused to the African Canadian experience? or focused to African Canadian residents, so that they, in their age, can feel comfortable knowing that they are still connected to their cultural background in the service that they're going to be receiving.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important, it's a really important monolithic, and you don't act in a monolithic way, but there are some cultural norms and some cultural issues that you would want to have addressed, whether it's for kids or whether it's for seniors. So what we've done is we've committed to building 30,000 more long-term care beds, and what we've said is 5,000 of those we want to target for ethnic specific communities. So in fact, there is the opportunity for people to come together and say, you know what, we need to create an opportunity for people to have a culturally specific experience. Now, I can't guarantee you that that will happen, and those 5,000 beds are not all allocated yet. So yes, that opportunity is there. We recognize that there's a need to have, particularly in a multicultural society like ours, we have to recognize that there are those kinds of accommodations that we need to make. And you know, there are long-term care homes that already exist like this.
That's correct.
I mean, my constituency office is on the main floor of a Finnish long-term care and retirement home, so it's a progressive one. So, and there are Chinese community long-term care. So I think that this is not a new idea, but it does take, as you said, it takes the community coming together and creating a vision and working with government to make that a reality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathleen Wynne, for coming in. I know that you have even though it's like 10 o'clock at night, you probably have a couple more stops to make. So we certainly do appreciate you taking the time to come and to talk to the GBKM FM viewers and sharing some of those, those deep answers. You really, it seems that you're well thought out, and we wish you both well in this upcoming election. Thank you so much.
Tk you very much.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Okay,
thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard from the Honorable Premier Catherine Wynne and also the leader of the Trillium Party as well. They both shared their thoughts and their vision for Ontario with us. And as you know, GBKM FM plays no role in or party affiliation. We are here to give you unbiased information so that you can make the educated decision for yourself as to who best represents you. This evening has been outstanding, and I just want to thank all of our viewers and our listeners for chiming in with us today. We're getting ready to wrap up our panel now because we have more people coming in. Wow, are we ever fortunate? We've got a jam-packed house still, so this party continues. Jazz, how are you holding up, girl?
Multitasking. That's what we do.
Wow, we're multitasking. Okay, so we've got some more candidates. George, fantastic question you put to the Premier. Fantastic, good for you. There you see, you got that question in after all. Fair and balanced. I agree with you, George. Fair and balanced.
That's it.
I'm not looking to get rid of carding, to say. I'll be honest. I do want somebody looking out for me. If somebody does appear a little shady and they're doing things in a way that, doesn't appear to be the norm, I don't have a problem with them being asked, hey, are you supposed to be here? Are you supposed to be doing the things that you're doing? I don't believe that is unfair. So, George, we need to find some form of balance. I agree with you. Oh, look at yes, please go ahead. Jump in.
So with the carding issue, right? I feel like you are right that I don't think it should be banned completely. To some extent, it should be banned, like stopping people on the street for no reason. But I feel like there are reasons in some cases, but then the way people portray it and make it seem like, oh, I didn't do anything though, but it could have been what you said that made him even want to stop in the first place. If let's say a cop is driving by and then it says and they stop and they ask you what you're doing, then you're like, why do you want to know? That alone can make a cop stop.
Draw suspicion.
Exactly.
Yes.
So sometimes it's the way we respond back that causes all this random carding, you know. And also, if I had the chance, I wanted to ask Kathleen, what are some of the things that you're doing to help reduce black crime? Because it's getting higher as it was back in the early 2000s. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
Fantastic. Well, we don't have Catherine with us anymore, but guess who we have now? We have the Honorable Andrea Horwath, which is the leader of the NDP, the provincial NDP party. She delivered some fire and brimstone tonight. I'll tell you, she's a rebel rouser. She got the crowd going, and they could really, they really understood where she was coming from. I think she was speaking right to the base here, because the individuals in this room knew exactly where Andrea was coming from in the responses that she gave, and that was clearly evident. And I just want to thank you so much for being here with us today and giving us the opportunity to speak to you on GBKM FM. And I would just ask if you have just a quick moment for the listeners and viewers that are still with us, which is quite a bit, if you can just quickly share why you felt it was important for you to be present tonight. Of all the places that you could have been, why did you choose to show up here tonight?
Well, I mean, I chose to, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come and engage with your listeners and with yourselves. I really appreciate it. And that's why I came here tonight as well, to engage with the Black community, to listen, and also to express. You know, I've been in politics for a while now, and some of the things that I was dealing with 30 years ago, you know, before I was even in politics, in terms of, you know, in my own community in Hamilton, still continue to exist today. The frustration levels are high. The problems don't ever seem to be solved. And so, so the issues of systemic racism in you know, whichever area of government you want to talk about, whether it's the criminal justice system, which we've talked about, whether it's the child welfare system, which we've talked about, whether it's the education system, whether it's the healthcare system, it is 2018, people. We should have been able to get it right. And so talking about it and listening is important to me, but I believe it can be so much better than it is now. I think we can do better than what's been achieved thus far, and that's why I'm here, to say to the, you know, the Black community, it doesn't have to be this way. I absolutely believe it does not have to be this way, and we need action over words. We need action.
Thank you so much. Thank you. George, I'm going to take the first question, and I'll let you come up back, because I know you're ready to get one in there. Yes. Ms. Horwath, I have an issue that I've wanted to share with a politician of your stature for so long, and I'm so grateful to have this opportunity today. I live north of the city. My office is in Toronto. I make a living in Toronto, but I live north of the city. I live, you know, in a place called Oro-Medonte, in all honesty. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful area, but I have to work in the city here in order to provide a living for myself. Now, in the, when Black people are spoken to here in Toronto by politicians, it always appears that the first thing that politicians want to talk about is giving free things away. You know, assuming that all of us, or the majority of us, are looking for a handout in some way, shape, or form. And don't get me wrong, I love your ideal about the pharmacare, and I like the ideal of being able to provide prescriptions, especially for the elderly. But there are a number of Black families that are doing well enough that they're not looking for these things. Mm-hmm. What they're looking for is an opportunity to keep what they already have, mm-hmm. instead of losing it to higher taxes and interest rates, mortgage interest rates, and property taxes, tuitions, and such like that. Can you address any of those concerns for those individuals?
Sure. Well, so there's a couple of things. I mean, I think it's definitely the case that life has become a little bit harder in the province of Ontario. People's hydro bills have gone up. The cost of food has gone up. The cost of housing has gone up. As you talked about, mortgage interest rates is one thing, but even the affordability of buying a house these days is becoming more and more out of reach for more and more people. So even, can I use the word middle class? Even middle class Black families, mm-hmm. are looking at, you know, at their own kids, and whether whether their kids are going to be able to achieve as much as they have been able to achieve. What are we leaving for the next generation? So when New Democrats talk about things like dental care, it might be the case that you're lucky enough to be one of the 2/3 of workers who have a dental care plan at work already. But there's 1/3 of workers who don't. And when you retire, 2/3 of people lose their benefits when they retire. So you might have had a dental plan the whole time you were working. Once you retire, you still need to get your teeth fixed, right? And so our plans, they don't say that this group is more deserving than that group in terms of age, for example. We think everybody needs dental care, and we should find a way to make sure that happens. We think that everybody needs prescription drugs, and yes, young people and seniors need prescription drugs, but so do people between the ages of 25 and 65, and that's why our plan is what we call universal, so that no matter how much money you make, or where you work, or when you made the province of Ontario your home, you should be covered by some of these basics. And yes, they do cost money, and I'm glad you raised that, because one of the things that we've committed to is making sure that middle-class families and lower-income families are protected against any more cost increases. People just can't afford it. No. They just can't afford it. But there are some folks that are on the very top of the income echelon. We keep talking about, over the years, we've talked about, the growing gap between, we used to be the rich and the poor, right? The growing gap between the rich and the poor. Now it's become the growing gap between the rich and everybody else, right? And so our plan, which is going to be unveiled in its entirety very, very soon, it does have some high-ticket items, things like dental care and pharmacare. But the way we're going to pay for that is through making sure that those at the very top are paying their fair share. And that's something that we think is necessary, because we are not going to get rid of that growing gap without public policy that helps us shrink it.
Thank you so much. And George, I just want to clarify the people at the very top. I'm a little concerned about that, and here's why. If I look at the Premier Catherine Wynn's budget, she's targeting households that are earning $90,000 or more.
Yeah, I don't think that's the very top.
No,
that's not the top in my opinion.
Thank you.
No, the top is higher up than that.
Putting 2 kids through university and paying for a mortgage with $90,000.
No, I agree with you.
It's just not happening.
No. And the fact that this happened, that the budget had this hit on everyday families, is pretty serious, considering what people are struggling with, just to try to hold on, right? I mean, and families are doing a great job, holding on and maintaining their quality of life, and keeping their kids in post-secondary education, and preparing kids for the future. Their families are doing a great job, but government needs to be there to provide some support and not just make it harder all the time. And so what I say is this: for decades now, we've switched between conservatives and liberals and conservatives, and life seems to just keep getting harder for folks. So this time around, it's time for something completely different. It's time for change for the better in Ontario.
Thank you so
I
much.
agree with you. Thank you so much for that answer. My name is Joe Chukwu once again. I'm with Afro Global Television, and it's such an amazing thing to have you here with us today. My question would digress a little bit again from the topic that we have right now. And this is something that is it touches my heart very greatly. My question is about the strikes in universities and colleges. We have seen such amazing impact on these young people, especially international students, who paid their money, came here to go to school. And these colleges, grown-ups, are fighting with each other like cats and dogs. And then even presently, the York University is having such an issue. And I haven't really seen any government come out to do or say anything in regards to this, because these kids are frustrated. They're not attending school. The colleges that the last one that happened with the colleges, it was almost how many weeks. They're still struggling to meet up with their studies. Some of them had to postpone. Their traveling back home simply because of the university fighting, or the colleges fighting. The staff fighting with each other. If you get elected as the Premier of Ontario, Just the same way that I have not seen nurses go on strike, police officers go on strike, why can't we, put a motion where professors and teachers and those in the educational system cannot go on strike? Find another area for them to be able to combat with each other and get whatever they want, rather than having these innocent kids as victims.
I don't disagree with you that the young people are the people that take the brunt of these strikes when they occur. But one of the problems we have in Ontario is that our province is going in the opposite direction of most other provinces. We have a significantly, quickly changing economy. Our economy is changing very quickly, and yet we are withdrawing public support from our post-secondary institutions. In fact, they're not even called public institutions anymore. It's not called the public university anymore. It's called publicly funded, because interestingly enough, more and more of the funding for colleges, well, mostly universities, is coming from international students because government withdraws the funding. We have the lowest per capita investment in, or rather per student investment in post-secondary. We're at the bottom of the barrel in Canada. And so what happens is those teaching assistants, for example, at York right now, and in the college sector, instead of having decent work, like a full-time job, they have contract work. And so some people have worked. One of my MPPs who resigned to go back into ministry, Sherry DeNovo, her husband is a teacher at college. He's been working at the college for over 20 years and doesn't have a full-time job. He works contract to contract, and what happens is these teachers sometimes, or these instructors and these educators at college and university, they do their contract work in the one location, and then they run down the highway to another college or another university to pick up another course and other students. And so the quality of work is poor, and then the quality of education is poor as well, because what if students need help after class? The professor is nowhere to be found because he or she's down the highway getting to the next job. And so there are issues with our college and university systems that need to be, I think, addressed, that will fundamentally help not only the quality of education, but will help reduce the numbers of strikes that are occurring. And just on the college strike that occurred, there is within the legislation that exists that governs colleges and governs the collective bargaining process, which broke down into a strike situation, that allows the government to get involved in that strike if it's in the public interest. So you don't need to take away the bargaining rights if the ability is already there. And if I'm not mistaken, the union involved, OPSU, is taking the government to court because they didn't use the leverage that they had to try to settle that strike more proactively. So I would say that that coming in on the idea that you got to remove the right to strike is a pretty big hammer. And one of the things that happens when you remove the right to strike is everything goes to arbitration, and we know that causes angst as well. We hear complaints about what the arbitration process has done in some of the other areas where the right to strike has been removed, for example, police and fire. Now, I believe that the arbitration system works. It does what it's supposed to do, but I think the collective bargaining process works as well. And if we believe that our post-secondary institutions need to be there to help our economy and our province respond to the changing nature of work, then we should be funding them appropriately. And our plan does exactly that. So when you see our platform very shortly, you'll see a commitment to post-secondary education that I think is going to significantly reduce the labor disruptions and disputes that have been ongoing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to get one question in before I turn it over to you, only because I know that you've got a very specific question to ask. Mrs. Horvath, I need to ask you. Andrea. Okay, great. Thank you so much. You're rising in the polls. There is definitely some momentum that is behind the NDP right now, and we wish you the best with that. One thing I will compliment the NDP for doing is for being able to identify injustices with fees, charges where it comes to insurance, car insurance, and some other fees that were being imposed on people, low-income people, mainly, of course, minority, Black. There is also another area that I would ask you to look into as well, as I mentioned to you, I live outside of the city. So I live outside of the city in an area or anywhere, well, north of the city. Those areas are not, predominantly struggling financially. But yet still, when I'm outside of the city, I go to bank machines, and those service charges for bank machines and service charges for any product or service that you're buying outside of the city seems to be extremely less than when I'm inside of the city. As soon as I come into Toronto, the bank service charges are twice as high as the service charges north of the city. Gas prices, everything is higher in Toronto, and especially in areas where it's predominantly black or minority held. So I think that there's something there if you can look into that and find out why are service charges, especially bank fees, so much higher in areas like Jane and Finch over and above Woodbridge.
Well, I'm glad you brought that to my attention. I didn't realize that. I mean, I did realize, of course, that the auto insurance industry is really has a policy that is completely unacceptable, and it's this community. I mean, this community is one of the communities that has literally the highest insurance rates, notwithstanding the fact that there's no evidence that leads to that being justifiable. And when we see that that this is a highly racialized community, we've named that as being a racist policy, and we will end that. That will not happen. When it comes to bank fees, we'll certainly have a look at it. The challenge for us would be that bank fees are federally regulated, right? The banking industry is regulated federally. But what we have tried to do, because the other thing is the check cashing places, right? The payday loan places. You'll find many, many more payday loan operations or storefronts in lower income neighborhoods. And in fact, Mayor Tory was just talking about, I think the City Council in Toronto is just talking about, putting restrictions on any further locating of payday loan, stores or operations in the city. The Liberal government's been in office for 15 years, 3 times now, and I've been here for 14 of those 15 years in opposition. 3 times now they've tried to regulate the payday loan industry, but they haven't done it effectively. They've not taken a stand that says this is a predatory type of lending, and it particularly feeds on the lowest income people, and it has to stop. And yes, there might be the need for some short-term loan types of operations, but not with the kind of 300% interest rates that we end up seeing that are affecting people, where the loans just keep rolling over and the interest keeps climbing and the people keep being digging themselves into a deeper and deeper hole. It's not acceptable. So the payday loan industry is something that's on our sites as well, because it as well targets lower income and racialized communities. Absolutely not acceptable.
Thank you so much for that.
I know you have to wrap. You probably have to wrap up as well. It's been a long night, and as Jackie said, you really put some sparks in there. You're really passionate about what you do and what you're saying, and a lot of the things really resonated with a lot of the people that were in the room. My only question for you, as we're leaving, is you said that you're going to roll out your platform soon. When will you be doing that, and or where is a website that we can go and find out more about what some of the things you're running on?
Sure. Our website is ontariondp.ca, and so anybody's welcome to go there. There's some of our plans are already up there. So our plan for pharmacare is there, our plan for dental care is there, our plan to bring Hydro One back into public ownership and reduce rates by 30% is there as well. The full platform's coming very, very soon, and you can get the information about that as it gets confirmed on that website, and we can also proactively let your station know that there goes the card. My press secretary is handing over his business card right now, so we will proactively put you on our list and invite you to the unveiling of our platform.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much for showing up. You did an awesome job.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard from the Honorable Andrea, she let me call her Andrea Horvath, the leader of the NDP party, and we are just so honored to be able to wrap up this evening in this outstanding way. We've been able to talk to all 3 candidates today, and even some other ones as well. The room was packed tonight, as I'm sure you've been watching and listening. Depending on what you're listening on or what you're watching, you would have seen that the enthusiasm here is real, and the results of tonight's debate are resounding with everybody that attended. I just want to thank you so much for tuning into GBKM FM, and I'm going to turn it over to the producer, Mr. Kenny Baz, right now as we wrap up the panel and say good night to you, and thank you so much once again for allowing us in your homes and your cars and your cell phones to share this outstanding night with you. GBKM FM is here to deliver everything politics between now and June the 7th. Keep it locked to GBKM FM as we continue to share everything political with you so that you can get all of the educated information you need in order to make that decision come June the 7th. Thank you so much. Jacqueline Dixon signing out. And I just want to thank my girl Janice Smith here for co-hosting here with me. We had a blast.
I was multitasking as what women do. Thank you, Jacqueline. And we want to thank George from Afro Global. Yes.
Yeah, definitely thank. And we want to thank Pastor George Vergap from Make It Happen, and Toye as well for being a panel member.
And we want to thank you, Jackie, too.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to turn it over to the cameraman. What about the camera crew? Yeah. We want to thank the camera crew. We want Lucky and his and Shala. Wow. Thank you guys so much. You guys did an awesome job. GBKM FM rocks. We're going to turn it over to the president and CEO, Mr. Kenny Baz.
I want to say a very big thank you to all our listeners. I want to say a very big thank you to Afro Global, to George, the lady there. I want to say a very big thank you for participating to all the panelists. I want to say thank you, Mr. Jacqueline, thank you, boss lady, thank you, Mr. Winston, all the hosts that was here that made